This week in IT, Gartner says that AI PCs are going from standard to niche, with 31% of all PCs by the end of 2024 and virtually everything by 2029. Microsoft and Cloudflare are quietly building a new web where pages answer your questions directly. And just when Copilot promises to improve Excel, Microsoft says don't trust its AI with anything important. So stay tuned for all the latest news. Welcome to This Week in IT, the show where I talk about everything connected to Windows, Azure, and Microsoft 365. Gartner announced this week that AI PCs so far are accounting for 31% of all PC sales. So that's 77 million units shipped, and they're predicting that next year that number will double. And by 2029, AI PCs will just be the norm. So what is driving this? Well, Gartner says the biggest reason is end of life for Windows 10, which is coming up this October, and enterprises are looking to future-proof their hardware investments with AI PCs. 8 out of 10 IT leaders say that they're going to invest in AI PCs and that the enterprise sphere for AI PCs will count for 93% of the market by 2028. So while it might seem that people are not rushing out to upgrade their PCs currently, there have been a lot of concerns cited that the new features that are offered in Windows that require an NPU, which is a requirement for an AI PC, that they're just not compelling enough for businesses or consumers to really want to upgrade. But of course, with Windows 10 end of life happening soon, but that could all change as Windows 10 end of life becomes closer. Gartner has some interesting side notes in this report, and you're probably aware that Microsoft announced its Surface AI PCs, or the Copilot Plus banner that it uses for these devices, only on ARM initially, and it wasn't until September last year that they released Intel versions of those devices. Now, we all know already that the Intel versions of those devices were really intended for business, and that the ARM versions were more aimed at consumers. Now, Gartner has confirmed that businesses are more interested in the Intel variants of these devices, and it also tells us why. That's because IT leaders are quite concerned about compatibility issues with ARM devices, and because they have a long history with working with the x86 platform, they can be sure that all of their applications are going to work with this hardware, and of course that's not necessarily the case with ARM. So although Windows on ARM has an emulation built into it, an emulation layer that in principle can run x86 applications, albeit with slightly reduced performance, IT leaders are not really convinced by that. Now, of course, we know as well that there are some applications that don't run on that emulation layer. So essentially, if you've got an ARM PC, you just can't use those applications. It tends to be things like antivirus, games. Of course, in the case of endpoint protection software, it's things that really connect deeply into the operating system and need to access the kernel directly that aren't necessarily going to work on ARM. So that's a concern for IT leaders. Although having said that, they do predict that ARM will have a reasonably healthy 30% share of the enterprise space going forwards. Another interesting piece of information is that AI customization is going to be a big thing going forwards, and they think this is going to allow vendors to essentially increase brand loyalty depending on how well their particular version of the customization works. So what does AI customization mean exactly? Well, they're talking about things where the device would actually learn how you use it and then optimize the performance, the efficiency of the device for you to make it personal to you. Now, this is something that can happen at the hardware level. This is something that can also be at the operating system level. We don't really see that in Windows today, but it could be that the next version of Windows uses that NPU to adjust also its power and efficiency settings, maybe preloading applications, files that it knows that you use at a particular time of day so that you can get faster access to them. Of course, there is some of that technology built into Windows today, but we're talking about a more advanced version where it would actually really be able to learn using AI and to make that process more efficient. It could even be as far as, going to providing a custom interface that works for your particular workflow rather than just providing a standard interface that you then have to customize. So there are lots of interesting potentials for these kind of PCs. And of course, we don't have all of this stuff today, but over the next couple of years, it seems that Microsoft, the vendors, and also Gartner and IT leaders expect this kind of technology to be more common. And if you don't have an AI PC with an NPU, you simply won't be able to take advantage of it. Before I go into the next story, I've got a quick favor to ask you. If you'd like to sign up for our This Week in IT newsletter, then please head over to the link that I'm going to put in the video description below, where you can also get a copy of our Patch Like a Pro, which is a quick guide to keeping your endpoints secure, so do check that out. The CEO of Cloudflare has been talking about how he thinks the model for the internet is broken today and how AI vendors are essentially scraping people's websites and stealing the information in a way that can't easily be monetized, especially for small publishers like Petri.com. This is potentially a problem going forwards. How do we monetize the content so that we can pay to bring it to you essentially for free? Now, Cloudflare is working with Microsoft to develop a new version of the web that they believe is more sustainable going forwards. And this is essentially using two technologies, a new standard developed by Microsoft called NLWeb that should make it easier for website owners to provide a natural language search feature, or an answer engine they're calling it, directly on their own websites. Probably what's a little bit more interesting is Cloudflare's AutoRAG option, and this is now available in beta. It's currently free, so I guess they're going to charge for this going forwards. But essentially what it does is allow automatic indexing of your site and then creating embeddings into a vector database, which allows you to perform semantic search. So if you're not familiar with the idea of semantic search, we've talked a little bit about this on the channel before because Copilot has semantic search. It's basically encoding unstructured data, things like images, text, all those things that you might find on a website. And it basically changes those pieces of data into numerical form, and these are called embeddings, and represent that data in a way that makes some kind of sense using a large language model, providing that it's been properly trained. And then you can basically make connections between the data, much like the human brain does. Once those connections have been made inside that database, you can do more sophisticated things like being able to search for similar items, to cluster items together, to classify them, and that's an advantage over a traditional database. And it's moving away from this kind of keyword-based search that we are all used to in Google. It's a more sophisticated way to index the data and then search for it. Cloudflare's AutoRAG keeps this vector database of your website up to date, and it allows you to basically create this database without all the technical burden of creating your own pipelines and database. Cloudflare has today the ability to block AI bots. I'm not really sure how well that actually works. That's a really tough thing to do. Of course, AI vendors are not playing by traditional copyright rules necessarily, and I'm a little bit unclear about, while this technology seems really interesting and something that we might consider implementing on Petri, I'm not sure how it solves the ultimate problem of people start their search journey in a search engine. That might become an answer engine in the future, but we're facing a new internet essentially where people are just not clicking through because they're finding the answer that they want, maybe 8 times out of 10, without having to dig deeper into the information. So sites like Petri or whatever are not getting that click through from search like they were in the past. So I do think the internet is going to change. It's already changing, of course, over the last year especially. The changes have been quite dramatic, and I think the websites that are really going to win are those that can create an experience that brings the user to the website regardless of search. Websites that rely totally on Google search are going to have a big problem going forwards. And I think what they're developing here is just a way to allow the websites that are more likely to succeed in this new world anyway to keep users there without them going back to a Google or to a Bing in order to perform that kind of natural language search that we're all starting to get used to. Could it be that websites even essentially kind of cease to exist in their current form going forwards? And of course that's a possibility, but I still think that they act as like a shop front, if you like, for a business or for an information portal. I don't think the website as we know it today is going to disappear anytime soon, but what would the internet look like if we didn't have websites as we have them today and we only had those answer engines that we kind of already have now starting to creep into search engines, things like ChatGPT? Can you imagine a world without the traditional website? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I don't know about you, whether you've tried Copilot in Excel, but from my experience with the relatively simple things that I do with it, it's absolutely useless beyond description. And I'm using Copilot in Word and other Microsoft apps, and it's been quite useful in most cases. But the promises that Microsoft made in those demos, I think it was from 3 years ago now, maybe 2 years ago, when they showed Copilot doing all these fancy things, analyzing data, this and that in Excel, have really failed to live up to expectations, at least in my experience. Whenever I've wanted to do something with Excel and artificial intelligence, what I do is I copy the table out of Excel, paste it into ChatGPT, and 9 times out of 10 it's able to do what Copilot failed in the first go without me having to change the prompt. It just works much better. Now, considering that Copilot is based on OpenAI, I'm quite amazed that Microsoft have managed to really mess that up. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I hope to see that fixed at some point. Recently, Microsoft has announced that Copilot is coming to individual cells. This new capability works with some existing functions, and you'll be able to use it to generate formulas and to summarize text. And this is available for Office insiders at the moment. It's in pilot. So I assume we'll see this in production at some point, and I really hope it works better than the Copilot that we currently have today in the stable channel. But the interesting thing here is that Microsoft is saying don't use it for anything important. So anything that is subject to regulatory and compliance, or anything that's critical for your business, they're encouraging you not to use it in those instances. So we know, of course, that sometimes AI lies, it hallucinates, it just doesn't really understand what you're asking it to do, and the results are just wrong. So this is coming with a public health warning, if you like. So don't rely on it for anything that's critical in your business, at least not at this stage. If you found this video useful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, because it helps to grow the channel and get the video seen by more people on YouTube. I'm going to leave you with another video now where I talk about MacroHard, and this is Elon Musk's attempt to simulate Microsoft's products and services using supercomputers, artificial intelligence, and the best AI talent that he can lay his hands on. So that's really interesting. Do check that out. But that's it for me for this week, and I'll see you next time.